everyone, welcome to Eng Lang Pro's YouTube channel. We're a team of tutors who've all done the VCE English Language course, and we're here to help you guys do as best as you can in the same subject. So my name's Tori, and today I'm going to be running through, I probably should have renamed this title, hang on one sec. I'm going to be teaching you guys how to analyze some features in an AC text with a focus on things in Unit 4. So I've gone through all the study design dot points for Unit 4, and I've taken out the most salient ones to kind of summarize it into this little column. So these are all the things that we're going to be discussing today, and I've put in some of the few ideas that I have for each feature, and we'll go through that, and then at the end we'll have a look at these two English language real exams from the past couple of years, and we'll pick out two texts. One of them is a section A, so it wasn't actually used as an AC text, but you could use any text as an AC text. So with that, let's get into it. So first of all, first feature on the top of the dot points is your standard Australian English. So what do we mean by this? We mean the grammatically correct, the one that's written into your dictionaries, the way that you should properly speak, right? This is the one that the prescriptivists will refer back to when they say you can't do that. You shouldn't end a sentence with a preposition, or you shouldn't end it with you shouldn't start a sentence with a conjunction, something like that. Overt prestige is going to be standard Australian English. So consider the fact that that's the form of English that is the most respected in general Australian society. And then consider this in conjunction with attitude. So I just mentioned this is the form of English that prescriptivists refer back to. And so think about that when you're analyzing it. Hey, the reason why this attitude is being shown, this prescriptivist attitude, is that this person believes only in the codified standard Australian English. Cool. Just remember that as we go through today, this is going to be in the context of ACs, but an AC is only about the most salient features. So if your text is entirely in standard Australian English, you're absolutely not expected to comment on every single sentence saying, it follows the subject, verb, object order, it's grammatical, blah, blah, blah. You can write maybe one sentence about that and the context of the text, but it's much more important that you talk about something that is there rather than something that's not there in terms of a feature that's, maybe misspelt or something like that. That could be non-standard. So don't worry too much if it's in completely standard Australian English, but if it's non-standard, there's going to be a lot of things to talk about. So be wary of anything spelt wrong or that's, ungrammatical, because you talk about how it's non-standard and how it's therefore not going to gain overt prestige. What are they trying to gain? What sort of covert prestige are they trying to gain? That sort of thing. Next up is Australian identity. So I've got a few things in, but I want you guys to have a little bit of a think what kind of creates that idea of the typical Australian in our minds. So we often like to say it's a very informal nature. We like to talk about the tall poppy syndrome. So where we like to think we're very egalitarian. So I might put that one in as well. Have a very egalitarian goals. So we like to think that everyone has a fair go. Obviously, this isn't the case at all in real life in Australia. We still struggle a lot with, equality between groups. But the idea of having a fair go, I remember there's this one text, the one about the kids competition, the first pitch for kids competition. If you guys have read that text, that one links to Australian values of striving for, the kids to really have a lot of value in creativity and innovation, entrepreneurship, that sort of thing. So those are some things to think about. Don't consider just Australian identity as being the superficial, laid back. Think about what are the values? What are Australian cultural values as well? So you could talk about, if someone starts swearing a lot on a train, that's going to, affect, first of all, negative face needs, but also that's considered in contemporary Australian society to be unacceptable. So think about that. Think about beyond just laid back and informal. Think about our values. Cool. Broad, general, and cultivated accents. So this will be probably more in a transcript sort of situation. But, again, if something is spelt wrong in a written text, they're trying to tell you to analyze something. So it's quite possible that something might be spelt wrong in your written text, and that's trying to signify a broad accent. So I would probably label it more as an Australianism or a colloquialism rather than broad or cultivated accent if it's written, just because you can't be super sure. So those are some things to think about. Broad, general, cultivated, is it spelt wrong in written? Tall poppy syndrome, cultural cringe. Actually, tall poppy isn't really that relevant here, but cultural cringe, think about the fact that the broad accent actually just came to be as a response to cultivated accents, which I guess is tall poppy syndrome. That's why I put that in there. But basically, cultural cringe is when the Australian people were kind of more proud of the British, this is colonial Australia, more proud of their British heritage. So they picked up this cultivated accent, which is more like received pronunciation in the British accent. And then tall poppy syndrome is more the fact that we want to cut down any like those hoity-toity cultivated accent people. So that's a response. That's where the broad accent came from. This is more essay stuff. Good to know, especially when you're analyzing it, but you wouldn't explain this all in your AC. This is your background information. Okay, diphthongs. How have I spelled this wrong? Oh yes, that H. Anyway, the answer is IPA. So how can we represent things like diphthongs? Let me find an IPA chart for you guys. Okay, so this is the diphthong and vowel section of the IPA, which you might not have seen before. But if you were to bring in to your AC something like this symbol here for bite, to really emphasize that when we're within an Australian accent, we tend to really accentuate our diphthongs. That would really, separate you from the other top scorers. So then, yes, also things like hyperchoristic endings, must pick them up in an AC. They're there for you to pick up. So things like garbo, servo, those are Australianisms. Then Aboriginal Australian Englishes, it's worth you having a bit of time to research different Aboriginal Australian Englishes, different features. You can talk about borrowings. If you pick up, it is kind of hard. Hopefully, if they talk about or they give you an Indigenous person talking in your transcript, they do specify if certain words are borrowed from an Indigenous language. But things like mob or deadly, they have we know them as having different terms, different meanings. If you were, for example, in England talking about them, they would both be, deadly would be an adjective meaning, able to kill you, and mob would maybe be the verb to, have a crowd of people mob you. And, they mean different things, because they've undertaken semantic shift when used in the context of Indigenous Australians. So, and then need to think about, how does this represent their identity, and what about the attitudes towards them when they say this sort of stuff? And consider, what is their response, the attitudes towards them using this language. Cool. Borrowings and accents are representative of migrant ethnolects. Again, this requires some time for you guys to research, so I'll leave that to you. But hopefully it'll be pretty clear that you can pick up in a transcript that, oh, hey, this is a borrowing from a different language because it's a language they speak at home. Prescriptivism and descriptivism. So descriptivism is taking language as it is. Language is a form of communication, so if you can understand it, it doesn't matter how well it's spoken, how grammatical it is. But prescriptivists have the opposite idea that, it should be standard Australian English only. Global contact and modern technologies. This is an interesting one. So look at your AC and think, are there borrowings from other languages or other Englishes? Think about global technology. So what sort of effect has the internet had on this transcript? What sort of speech has come from things like character limits on Snapchat and whatever? Are there emojis in the text? How is that relevant to globalization and modern technologies? So things like graphemes and emojis, hyperlinks, all of that stuff is relevant. Age-related language. So if you can pick up, quite archaic language relevant to the fact that the speaker is older, or slang which is fast changing and it's maybe related to e-speak, it's teens that are talking, that's age-related language as well. A pretty common one actually. So definitely be able to pick up things like acronyms and initialisms that are part of e-speak, and the fact that teenagers tend to use certain slang. You're probably already recognizing differences between our Gen Z speech and then Gen Alpha's speech as well. So you can, attest to your daily life how you guys have different slang to the generation below us. Gender. So this one's really interesting as well. So if you see something like fireman, policeman, chairman, or instead like police officer, chair, what do they call firefighters? Right? Those are all more equality-based terms, right? We've taken things that are, first of all, kind of associated with, power and prestige, that were also associated with men only, and now they are more gender diverse. So that's about, changing attitudes in society. And uptalk, I've talked about it in one of my other videos, but it's cool to have a bit of a look, do some research about how there's a bit more rising intonation. Studies have shown in women's speech, or they're seen as less certain about their speech or whatever they're saying, right? Because traditionally they've not been seen as to have as much valuable input. So they tend to have less confident sort of intonation. So super interesting. That one would probably be quite difficult though in just an AC. So more an essay topic for that one. Sexuality. So think about some terms that have been kind of adopted or have become more mainstream from the queer community. And you can even discuss, like, if they're, I think this is unlikely, but if they gave you a text with derogatory terms in it, discuss that and its societal implications as well. Occupation, interest, aspiration, and education are all pretty similar parts of identity in the fact that they're in the way that they are represented through languages. A lot of the time it's just jargon, but have a little bit of a think about the subtle differences between each of them, like how occupation is more of an external part of your identity, whereas interests, aspirations are internal facets of your identity. Overt and covert norms. So same as prestige, super important to think about how in-groups and out-groups will view language differently, will give it prestige differently, what is considered the norm in certain situations. So for an overt prestige and norm, what sort of language do we expect when we're talking to a stranger on the train? Probably just a sorry if you step on someone's foot or something like that. Probably unlikely that you'd sit down and tell them your life story, right? Whereas that would be more of a covert norm between close friends. And then finally, we've got code switching. So it's not just different languages. Different languages you should definitely pick up and talk about, but also a switch in register. So talking to your best friend compared to talking to your principal will have different registers. That's because you are different social distances. So remember the context, who you're talking to, and what the situational context is of the discussion is going to really, really influence the different register that you're going to take. And that could switch up within the same transcript. So talking to someone and then talking to someone else within the same transcript is definitely a possibility. So be aware of that and be able to pick up on code switching. Cool. So with that, let's move on to reading these two texts. I'll give you a sec, pause the video here. This is section B of the 2023 EngLang insert, which you can find on the VCAR past examinations website. And here we've got the 2022 EngLang insert for section A, which is from Cooking on Country. This Notion doc will be available for you down in the link below, so you can read it in there as well. But yeah, let's have a look, go through, see what we can pick out. Let's discuss now what you guys found. Hopefully you found some of the things I did in that text. So when I had a look, it seemed like most of it was non-standard, quite informal, a lot of rapport building in group membership, very like trying to build a connection between the two, right? There was a lot of, kind of from both sides really, but Abby Chatfield was really trying to create a very welcoming environment, kind of, kind of giving compliments, that sort of thing. And then on the other side, what's his name? I've been reading it the whole time. What the hell? Adam Hyde, I think. Yes, Hyde is also very informal. He's talking about his experiences. So it's very informal, spontaneous, and non-standard. So things like non-fluency features, but for emphasis, make-in, so G-dropping, and like non-standard fillers, all of this is non-standard Australian English, which also links to their attitudes are more likely to be descriptivist rather than prescriptivist, right? Because otherwise they'd be using standard Australian English. In addition, while I was thinking about that, I also found that Hyde in line 64, he kind of code switches a little bit into talking about a little bit more of a professional tone. So the presets just produced the DMA's new record, which is very much, discussing his profession. It's more professional, but then that only lasts for a line and then he switches back into informal. What else is there? So a lot of Australian identity. So a bit of humble larrikinism from Hyde. So he's very humble when Abby Chatfield says, "You're like the best ever musician ever." He takes that, very humbly. And when she says, "Yeah, I'm going to go with Ever, babe," she uses a very endearing vocative, babe. It's extremely informal, extremely informal. As corny as it sounds on line 39, so this is kind of humorous recognition of his own, he's trying to play off his corniness and he's recognizing it, talking about it, self-deprecating humor, right? And that's very much part of Australian identity. Profanity, very much part of Australian identity. Talk my shit in line 37 is an example of it. And then there's cultural references. So they talk about golden features, for example, in the presets, which are Australian bands. So obviously that's going to be relevant to the situational context as well. So in terms of accent, again, it's hard to say. It's probably a general accent. But you can talk about phonetics and phonology. So here we've got some connected speech processes. So G-dropping is most likely to be assimilation between that word and the next word. So making music or something like that. Sort of making music. But gotter as well is vowel reduction. And of course, bringing two words together, blending got to. And got to itself is actually an informal version of have to or must or something like that. So these are all informal connected speech processes. Then we've got, so these are not present in this text, not really at least. Yep, didn't really find anything for Aboriginal Australian Englishes or migrant ethnolex. In terms of slang and age, they've got a bit of slang in there, but it's not obviously Gen Z or Gen Alpha, right? I've just put in dude. Dude is an endearing term. You can talk about it in terms of age, like it's a little bit millennial, as at the time this was written, Hyde was 27. But you don't need to say that in terms of age. You can just talk about that in terms of rapport building strategies between the two of them. Gender, kind of hard to say. You could say that the informal vocative babe is more of like a female to female, female to male sort of term, but I probably wouldn't go there because you don't really have any evidence to back that up. Sexuality wasn't really there. Occupation, so there was some field-specific lexemes, so producer, record, guitar, all of that represents not only the occupation, but also the interests, aspirations of Hyde. And then any topic management technique, so every time she introduces a new topic, so for example, she says, but why did you start Kelly Holiday? That is literally a representation of Abby Chatfield doing her job as the host of the podcast, right? So that's part of her occupation. Then overt covert norms. So again, see the big list we had for Australianisms and Australian cultural context and identity. That's all part of the in group. And so probably the covert norms, especially things like swearing, is very much covert over overt. And yeah, we talked about code switching. So that is a super, super quick breeze through this text in terms of Unit 4 only. Of course, there's a lot more to analyze, but I'll leave that for you guys. Let's move on to this text, Cooking on Country, hosted by Rulla Kelly Mansell. Have a read through this, see what you think about above these points, and then I'll go through as well and we'll compare at the end. All right, how did you guys go? There's quite a lot in here, and as well for some of the stuff that we didn't get to discuss with the first text, which is nice. So starting from the top again, a lot of it is non-standard Australian English, which is nice. Cook in wanna, you can find examples. It's not hard to find non-standard Australian English. What is hard is to link this to something like a descriptivist attitude, or the fact that it represents the cultural, situational, social context. Australian identity, we've got top end tucker. Top end refers to the northernmost area of the Northern Territory. That's kind of just a cultural context sort of thing. It could as well be part of Aboriginal Australian Englishes, since, there's quite a lot of different cultural groups in the Northern Territory. But I wasn't too sure, so I put it in Australian identity. Because there's obviously some overlap between Aboriginal Australian Englishes and Australian identity. We've also got beautiful, where it could kind of suggest a broader accent, but we'll leave it because the speakers, you can't really tell. And also we know that they're all Aboriginal, or it might be Torres Strait Islander people. Yeah, Larrakia men. And so it could be an Aboriginal Australian English feature. So we'd just say the assimilation of the t sound to the d sound. Beautiful, beautiful. We've got quite a lot for Aboriginal Australian Englishes. So Larrakia country is a respectful address with the proper noun at the start. Brother for kinship, a interrogative tag. A lot of cousins to feed, and listing on 33, line 33, which is about here. Families, aunties, uncles, parents, all of that reflect the cultural context of big, kinship families and their cultural values. Cool. Didn't have anything for migrant ethnolex, unfortunately. Global context. So this one's actually really interesting. Usually when you think about this, you think about global contact and globalization in the 21st century and the 20th century. They talk about Murchison traders, and they've actually given you the context saying that the Murchison traders are people from Sulawesi who collected and processed tripang, sea cucumber, from the coast of the northern Australia around the middle of the 1700s. So if you don't know, that's in Indonesia, which is so fascinating. It's for so long ago, but technically, that is global contact. So super interesting, but a little bit hard to analyze. Maybe in terms of cultural and historical context is how I'd approach that. I've put brother in for gender, but there's not too much to talk about there. Occupation, any sort of field-specific lexemes in terms of cooking. So there's a lot of that with, cleaning the crab, a little crack, chili, ginger, garlic. That's syntactic patterning of listing. And, it's, I think, either... okay, so Daniel is demonstrating how to make chili mud crab, and he's a native food producer in Darwin. So that can be represented by the field-specific lexemes. And Rulla is the host. So again, same thing with Abby Chatfield, right? Any sort of topic management or floor managing techniques are going to be part of his occupation. And you should probably spend quite a lot of time delving into things like that with, rising intonation to hold the floor, falling intonation to pass the floor, that sort of thing, in terms of the relative roles of everyone in the text. But yeah, that's going to be really it. Overt and covert norms, again, you need to kind of link back to the stuff we've already talked about. So clearly we've got a lot of non-standard English here. What does that mean? Overt norms between the cousins. Yeah, you don't need to think of that separately. You shouldn't think of any of these ideas in isolation. They're all interconnected with each other, as with everything in English language. Yeah, so I hope this has been helpful for you guys. This will be in the link below. Have a look through, have a go. You should watch this in conjunction with, I think Emma's doing a video on focusing on Unit 3, but really remember that everything that you learn throughout the year should be incorporated into your AC. So this is really as a guide for you guys as you go through Unit 4 over the next couple of months, but don't remember to not only use this. This is just a supplement, and make sure that you continue to talk about things like register. Super, super important to talk about in your ACs. But this part is often neglected in ACs, I find. So it's good to have a little bit of an isolated look at it as well. So with that, I hope you all have an amazing next couple of weeks studying up on Unit 4, and all the best for your English language journey. See ya!